Hope you had a great lunch and are having a great conference. You're meeting new people, getting some fresh ideas. We're going to continue with content. We're going to be joined by SiteSpect, one of our other sponsors, with a strategic briefing. I'm going to hand it over to Tim so I don't take any of their key time away.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. My name is Tim Hudson. I'm an optimization consultant with SiteSpect, Inc. SiteSpect is a leader in customer experience optimization for some of North America's largest brands in North America and Europe. Sorry about that. I'm joined today by our partners at Weyco Group. Today we have Jeff Douglas and Ryan Whitman from Weyco. Weyco is the parent company of some popular footwear brands such as Boggs, Florsheim, and Stacy Adams. On the left I have Jeff Douglas. Jeff has been at Weyco Group for almost 2 decades now. He actually began back in 2003 as a retail marketing analyst, and today is a vice president of marketing for Weyco. On the right, we have Ryan Whitman. Ryan was just promoted, actually. He's now a manager, and he's a manager of business insights and growth marketing. He's responsible for all internal and external analytics tools. Ryan is also the primary evangelist for Weyco Group's movement into data-driven optimization, and he led the way with Microsoft Power BI. SiteSpect and Weyco actually first met back in 2020 and joined forces for the first time in the midst of the pandemic as a lot of customers started to move from purchasing in stores to online. Since that time, SiteSpect and Weyco have launched 52 A/B tests together, and they're using more than 200 different metrics across each of their websites. And these things are measuring everything from the homepage to the checkout. And they are optimizing for add to carts, conversion, average order value, and improvement on site performance. So, gentlemen, your journey into customer experience optimization actually began long before SiteSpect in 2014. Why don't you tell us what happened?
I'll use this one. So we actually have been doing a lot of testing going way back to the Google A/B test days. But there was one kind of major integration that we decided to do, and it was kind of a difficult one. Basically, the resources that we had at the time in our IT area was a lot more limited. The technology itself was kind of like, hey, here you go, check it out, let us know if you have questions. So we really didn't have resources internally. We weren't getting the help externally, but we had this incredible list of things that we wanted to understand. It ultimately failed. So basically, we were really struggling, but we wanted to find a way to get more A/B multivariate testing out there so that we could better understand how to move forward in a more scientific way.
Absolutely. And as we all know, when the pandemic kicked off, that was no longer really an option to do this kind of work. So tell us what you did to respond to the pandemic when you started to notice that customers were really moving online entirely.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and hello, everyone. We were right into survival mode. I mean, we sell non-athletic dress shoes, so obviously people weren't going to events during COVID. And really, we knew that we had to make decisions much faster and do complicated analyses that told executives what they wanted to know, but also get to the granular level to make small tactical decisions. And so we launched a Power BI-based dashboard that allowed us to kind of replicate all those analyses that we wanted to do first. The second question then became, how can we answer some of the questions on the site that we had and have the same level of data and detail needed to make a good decision. And that's where we created a list of things that we wanted to kind of test. And they ranged from how do we re-engage customers better? How do we communicate to all customers in a more effective way? How do we prospect to customers, new customers, turn them into customers, and then prove the value of the product in a time when it was hard to sell shoes? and that's where we turned to SiteSpect.
Absolutely. Well, setting up a testing program inside of a company is a significant financial investment, and it also demands a lot of people resources. Can you tell us how it is that you were able to gain a champion and really get a lot of initiative and leadership behind your program?
Yeah, so I would say the catalyst, as Ryan said, was we had all these insights coming in, and we were trying to say, okay, well, what are we going to do with these insights? How do we unlock the value? And it did help for us to have senior leadership that already was very data driven. They're not an executive summary type of person. They are definitely in the details about everything. So it's great to have data minded individuals. Also, they have some trust in being able to say, okay, that makes sense. What's the ROI? So that was like one of those things that back to that original A/B tests platform, having bad results or unstable results was one of those things that we really felt like we needed to get some of these answers. So to find a champion was not that difficult because we already were asking all these questions. There's more of how do we get to the bottom of it? And I think once we started vetting that out, we quickly found that we could kind of get to that pretty easily.
Absolutely. So definitely a huge advantage to have the leadership like you have with John Florsheim. I think the next question then is why SiteSpect? You chose us as your partner, so let us know why.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Jeff mentioned, we had a pretty sour experience across the board. It was like we had bad data coming in, no technical support, and no real leadership as far as leading us to tests that would prove value quickly because they've run those tests before. And so SiteSpect really, through our conversations, was able to teach us about how to technically set it up, and they worked with two technical teams, both our IT infrastructure team as well as our programming team. And then we also had to be trained on how to set up the tests because we with our previous vendor, it was just like, oh, go off and do it. Great. But with SiteSpect, they worked with our programmers to say, this is like best practice. So we were always getting the best practice test set up. Then there was the analysis training, and I was the main analyst on the team. And so I spent many hours with our rep discussing white cases and other tests and different ways to look at it. And those were extremely beneficial conversations because it helped me grow as an analyst to think differently about it. And so really, SiteSpect held our hand through the whole process, which for us, we have a small but mighty team. And so when we look at vendors, we really want that vendor to be a third person on our team to kind of help be, our support. So,
absolutely, we definitely do.
I was going to add something if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would say when we started in on kind of vetting out SiteSpect was the team that they had, more specifically, being an e-commerce site and having retail experience does matter. Just how the site's structured, how products flow through, and that technology of being able to understand how to unlock retail value, e-commerce value. So what was wonderful is the team that they have there has a lot of retail experience. And again, one of the things we thought about was we went into it saying, we don't know how to really get through this. So we kind of really wanted somebody that's going to have a lot of professional hours dedicated to our account. So right out of the gates, it was two people kind of full-time into really helping us out. So I just want to throw that in as a major component associated with why we selected SiteSpect.
Absolutely, and I think that is part of why we really see things as a partnership because we are involved in much more than just the product, but we're also trying to think with you and strategize with you. I think one of the most exciting things in A/B testing is when you get that first test that really proves out the value, returns your investment, really quickly. For you guys, that was a pop-up test, a modal pop-up test on your cart. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we knew that cross-selling in retail was extremely important, and Jeff's kind of favorite catchphrase was, do you want fries with that? And so it was kind of asking that question all along the customer journey. And so one of the first tests that we ran was right when the customer enters the cart. We used to have a static kind of lower little unit widget down at the bottom, and what would happen is as people would add things, it would get bumped down. The products didn't change, so we worked with SiteSpect to basically create a pop-up that could then replicate what was on the cross-sell section from the PDP. So this was very personalized to the person's cart, and so we had great success because of this, and so visibility increased by 22%. Click-through rate was 243%. We had add to cart rate of 83%, and then ultimately this widget saw a 408% increase in revenue. So hugely successful for this test.
Again, this is like our aha moment. Like oftentimes you're trying to test things like, oh, does that color of that button matter? Does the position of this thing matter? And it's like until you really get a win that has this much revenue attached to it, it's kind of tough to kind of sell this up into a C-suite. So this to us was the yes, like we've got one here. It was a lot of revenue, and it was a really simple action. And that whole idea of being more disruptive. Like one of the things we learned with SiteSpect was, we want to do all this like cart testing and all these things way down at the bottom of the funnel. And it's kind of like, well, wait a second. And this is kind of like what our talks were, well, how do you get more revenue? Well, you need more carts. Well, how do we get more carts? Well, you need more PDP views. So it's like you start going through this logic chain of where is the value. And this one just happened to be our first one. I think it was like 5 tests in. It really was a wonderful moment for us.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Definitely seeing numbers like a 400% increase on that on the revenue for that widget. Aside from direct revenue growth, though, you've learned quite a bit about your customers. What are some of those insights that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, I think working for a very established brand holding company, there's a lot of beliefs that may or may not be true, but we believe them because that's what we've had. And so I think the first thing is kind of approaching any test, not knowing kind of what the result is and being open to that. And we got that with our first test on the homepage where only 26% of people went below the fold. So here we are spending all this time thinking about, well, what's going to be in the second main container all the way down, and yet only 26% of people go and sit down to see it. And so that really opened up our eyes. We also have an older customer because our brands are established, and big and bold for our customer works. So a bigger search bar with a personalized message had much more interaction than a small little magnifying glass. And I was talking with my dad this weekend about it, and he was saying, half the time I can't find it on the website, the search. And then the other one was top navigation redesign, and we thought, well, a more consolidated version of that would lead to more click behavior, but it actually led to less. So yes.
Keep on adding in, sorry. Another one of those things, managerial, is you often get people who have very particular ideas of how things should be done, how it should look. Oh, that represents the brand the best. And I think one of the things of being a more data-driven culture is being open to having those conversations. You have to be able to ask yourself, is that thing going to add or destroy value on the website? You have thousands and thousands of people who go through this, and I was like one of those things that's really what I'd say is like a big kind of learning for us is just openness and being a culture of asking kind of why and what's going on there. How do we come up with additional iterations? How do we unlock more value? So that was something that I would say is one of those kind of key learnings.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Sometimes the results are great and clean and easy to understand, and sometimes they require a closer look. What are some of those situations where you might have had a test that appeared to be a loser or might have had confusing results?
Yeah, I would say it was that top nav redesign test that led to less clicks overall. And that that was hard because, you know, from a graphic side, you know, our graphic designers do this every day, and for them, it's personal, and no one wants to hear that their design didn't work. And so, you know, we had 11% less clicks in that test, and then with the menu reduction test, and then we also did like a complete top nav redesign after that, which also led to less clicks. So it's like we had two kind of in a row that weren't performing, but I think the learning there is that we were learning that that strategy wasn't working, and so we could pivot.
Yeah. I'd again say, like, one of the things that's interesting about negative results or neutral results is this idea of iteration. And I was in a session earlier where one of the takeaways was iterate, iterate, iterate. And so I'm going to echo that, because oftentimes you get to this point where there are learnings, there's metrics. Many times we have 10, 15 different metrics that we're looking at with some of these tests. And some of them will prove out to be an interesting find. And I think it's sitting down with the team to be able to say, like, well, what about that? How do we iterate and unlock that value? Just because it was negative or just because it was neutral, you don't just scratch your head and move on. It was really digging in and understanding that. So it's like we would constantly do like a test and then another test and then another test, all on the same theme. And it's quick to kind of change and deploy, so you're able to get those results really quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that you have as many as 15 different metrics in a test at one time. So think about for a second, if you will, imagine if you had deployed some of these designs or changes into your production site without testing them. How might that play out?
Yeah, that would be brutal. We operate 18 domains. So oftentimes what we're doing is we have common architecture, common elements. So if we prove something out, it's great because then you start rolling it across. There's an incredible amount of labor to kind of go back into the back end to switch something out, so like a top nav or something like that. So if we didn't test that out, we'd be going through months and months of work, and it's our tech teams here, and they're going to nod their heads. It's like months and months of work to kind of go through that, only to destroy value, right? So it's like you really want to be sure what you're getting yourself into.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. So switching gears for a second away from just testing in general, another thing that you do with SiteSpect is you use our product recommendations. You have an interesting story about how you came into using product recommendations, though, which also uses artificial intelligence, I should say. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so we had went down the path of selecting a vendor to kind of partner with, and had also a fairly difficult time kind of working with them because they lacked the nuance required of our product to efficiently like serve recommendations both to all customers. And so we had traditionally had Olivia, who is a human, and so she spends all of her time kind of merchandising the site. And the problem with that is the scale. And so SiteSpect came to us and said, well, we have a solution that's AI-driven, that uses a feed, and we were worried about our nuance because we only sell men's dress shoes on Florsheim, and we're able to work with their engineers to be able for the algorithm to understand the nuance of our product to more efficiently sell. And so the result was extremely powerful, led to 15% more add to carts and 33% more revenue in all of the cross-selling locations. And for those who don't know what cross-selling is, it's like you may also like or popular products that might be on the home page. Sometimes they're on the bottom or top of the grid page, the PDP, and then cart pages sometimes too. So a wildly successful test.
Can you back up one slide just real quickly? One thing I wanted to point out. So like oftentimes when we went into merchandising, we would say, hey, if it's a gray shoe on the left, your left, you'll see all these other gray shoes, and they're all kind of in the same category. So here we're thinking, hey, we're tailoring an experience. You know, we are merchants, we know what we're doing. And, you know, one of the things that was terrifying is, well, what's going to show up? And I would say that was like our previous failure with a different company was because it was feed-based and there's so much nuance, it was just a crash and burn, like to the point where we abandoned it before it really even launched. And in here, we were able to get quick results, and it was able to prove out as the metrics if you go forward with the metrics. But it was just one of those things that oftentimes you have these business practices that are deeply rooted in your company, and it's sometimes terrifying to do some of these tests. And I would just say, like, the thing that we found with some of these is how quickly you could deploy these, how you could control how much of the audience sees that, right? It doesn't have to be everybody. It could be just 10% of the audience, but you're able to get real insights that might fundamentally change your business practices.
Absolutely, yeah. Product recommendations is a little bit of a black box, but it can really prove out those things that are counter to your intuition. In this particular case with Olivia, recommendations also offered scale, which is a great technical benefit. However, there's definitely a human side to testing. What are some of the skills that are really necessary for a stellar testing program?
Yeah, I think coming at it with that mindset of being objective and being humble about like your expectations, I think that you will get surprising results, and that can be challenging to manage in a team because you have a lot of team dynamics that go into that. So I would say that that's the first one, and I would also say kind of laying out a path that tests can come from really anyone within your organization, and having kind of a list and being able to lean on a partner who has the experience to prioritize the tests, so that way you can quickly get some wins or some flat or negative results that lead to what you shouldn't do is still valuable, but you hope that you'll get a winner in like one of those first 5 or 10 tests. So I would say those two are probably the most important.
I would say like downstream activities. So it does create more creative, right? Because you have to start thinking, how am I going to display that? It does create more analysis. So who's looking at that? But I would say like that was some of our concerns right out of the gate. But there's a lot of help that SiteSpect offered us, where you're able to search a particular element in HTML and replace it. You might be able to change something on the fly, and an analysis, like they walk you through each of the results. Like we always had a post-mortem on every single test. Like, what's your take? How do you look at that? So you don't have to put all of that onto an analyst or whoever's looking at your results right now. There is ways of being able to do that pretty quickly and helpful. So.
Ryan, I think you've also told me before that a major component to the success in your program is really being curious. So just thinking along those lines, what does it mean for you to be curious with your testing program?
Yeah, I mean, I think asking the tough questions. I think if you're asking, like to Jeff's point, like should the button be red or green? I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think it's how can I either increase my revenue, or what kind of really out there things could I change that might end up being kind of like the gold pot at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. And so always asking questions at every step of the testing cycle is like the best way to kind of proceed forward that way. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you. Any last words, Jeff?
I guess if I were to throw in a little bit more is also, we talked a little bit about culture, and what's really what the affirmation for me is when everybody's contributing, right? As you get this culture of, well, we should test this because of this, and they feed off of each other, and that's kind of one of those cultural changes that we definitely have seen within the team of, asking a lot more curious questions, getting to the point where you have a lot of internal buy-in, like not top bottom, but lateral.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Speaking of curious questions, do we have any questions today? Do we have another microphone?
You guys have it.
I could probably speak up. How do you prioritize your liquid tests? I'm assuming you have a lot of them, and you don't, once you start, you then get a huge amount coming in. And so how do you do that prioritization as a group? Because it's usually the newest one makes it to the top. It might not be the best.
Yeah, I think the way we kind of looked at it is we wrote everything down, and then we had conversations with SiteSpect to kind of figure out where were the highest revenue driving opportunities first. Then we also looked at what other marketing objectives did we want to hit during the year, and did any of those line up with potential tests? So, like in the example of the checkout, our checkout was launched in 2018, so it had been a few years that we had touched that. So we knew we needed to optimize it. So we said, hey, why don't we just create a test around that? And it was actually very interesting, and we got some different results across our brands. And being on one architecture, that kind of really, made it challenging. Yeah. So we kind of looked at revenue potential as well as what aligned. Would be mine. Do you have anything?
Yeah, and yes, once you start, there's no stopping. It's kind of funny when you go into this and you're thinking like, oh, I got 20 questions I have to answer, and it's like I think our list is like over 80 right now. But it is revenue driving, and it's also just like lift versus reward as well. Again, we have a tech team, front end, back end, that's able to say, oh boy, you're talking like a serious lift. Okay, let's deprioritize that, even though we think there's value. And again, like I would say, our help with SiteSpect as partners, they're able to say, yeah, we've already done that 20 times. There's value there. You need to find out what works for your customer, or well, we're not really sure, so you just kind of put it in the middle. It's like it does change, like where you think one test might completely change your list. So we go through this, I would say at least quarterly, maybe even more, looking at that list and trying to reprioritize.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff and Ryan. Everybody, thank you for joining us. We will be at booth 18, and Jeff and Ryan will be there also to answer any more questions you might have. And I think there might even be a happy hour later. So please come join us. Thank you.